All right, it's 10 o'clock. I'd like to welcome you to the November 19th issue of the Farm Office Live. We're pleased again to come to you live over the computer to discuss today's hottest farm management and ag law issues. And from what Peggy tells me, we even have more to discuss from things that are happening in Washington, D.C. But I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar to give you just again to talk about the folks that will be bringing information to you today from left to right. Diane Shoemaker, who's our OSU Extension Field Specialist for Dairy Production Economics. Barry Ward, Director of our OSU Income Tax Schools and Leader for Production Business Management. Peggy Hall, Director of the OSU Ag and Resource Law Program. And yours truly, David Marison, Extension Educator over in Coshocton, Ohio. And behind the scenes, we couldn't do this program without what's happening behind the scenes. And that we'd like to thank Julie Strauser, our OSU Ag Program Assistant, as well as Jeff Lewis, the Attorney Research Specialist in our Ag Law Program, for being on behind the scenes, helping to drop those things into chat, making sure that folks are able to get on and to see today's program. So thank you, Jeff and Julie. And we have been doing this for the last couple of months. We will have a special guest today. It's worked out well. We've got to introduce some of our new faculty that are coming into Ohio State. And today, Margaret Chitlowski is going to be with us, fresh off of her presentation at the Ag Policy and Outlook Conference yesterday. So we'll be talking to Margaret as we go along to today. Just a reminder that the recording of today's as well as Wednesday evening's program will be up on the Farm Office Live website, as well as if you want to access those slides, go ahead, you can get on there and get the PowerPoint slides and download those to your computer so you can follow along with us today and refer back to those. Or if you want to print them off and take notes, you're more than welcome to do that. Just go to go.osu.edu/Farm Office Live. And there's our friendly woolly bear, which I know my mom up in Northeast Ohio has got some snow last night. So our friends in Ashtabula County that may be logging in, we understand you have snow on the ground today. And of course, questions. We encourage your questions. And there's two boxes that you'll see on your controls for the Zoom. One is a chat box, and that chat box is what Julie and Jeff and everybody else will be dropping in email links or links to websites, as well as phone numbers, whatever we need to share with you. And then you're able to cut and paste those back to your own computer. But if you have a question, we would encourage you to put that in the Q&A box. Go ahead and just type your question in there. And as we move through today's program, of course, we will try to answer those questions live, or we might be able to do that online behind the scenes and get you the answers that you need. And then if maybe this weekend you're thinking about and reflecting on today's program, you say, I have a question, don't hesitate to give us an email, drop an email. You can drop it to me at marison.2@osu.edu, and I'd be happy to get out to our team. And in turn, we'll get your questions answered. As far as our evaluation, we always will ask you for an evaluation. So as you exit today's Zoom, we will drop it into the chat box as well. But as you exit your computer, we'll give you the option to go and do this survey. And we do appreciate those that answer those questions that we ask, because that helps us prepare and plan for our next Zoom webinar. So if there's topics that you would like to see in the future, don't hesitate to drop those into that evaluation, and we'll make sure that we can feature some of those topics in our December round. And our topics today, first, we'll introduce Margaret, and then we've made a couple shifts from Wednesday night. For those that might be back from Wednesday, we've made some shifts in our lineup, but we're going to have Barry and Julie are in the middle of tax school season, and they have a tax school that's going to kick off right after the noon hour. So we move Barry up front for the crop input costs and margins. Of course, it's a topic that's front and center on a lot of farmers right now about those input costs and margins for 2022. And then a federal legislation update. And I think this may be top billing today, Peggy, because of just something that was passed in the House with Build Back Better. Love to say that because it's that ring, Build Back Better, and without getting your tongue twisted on that. But we have a lot of federal legislation update. And then we're going to roll into a couple federal farm program updates, because there still is some movement on that side, and then come back to Ohio with a state legislature update. Some really cool things happening there. And then last couple months, we've been featuring the Farm Business Analysis 2020. So Diane Shoemaker is going to continue that discussion on the Ohio Farm Business Analysis. A lot of great numbers that we can pull and things that we can learn from that. And then as we end today's program, of course, we'll just tip you off on some upcoming programs that you might want to put on your calendar for the future. And again, anytime that you have a question, don't hesitate to drop that in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to answer those. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask the other panelists to shut their cameras off. And we're going to leave Margaret, and I'm going to stop my share so we get a full screen here. And welcome, Margaret. Look, you look refreshed after you got your ag policy program done. I heard I wasn't able on because we were teaching in tax school, but I heard you did a great job. Margaret, welcome you to, I guess this is a delayed welcome because you have been working for Ohio State since August of 2020. Of course, you came to Ohio State, transitioned at a weird time because that was during the COVID and nobody was on campus working. So you didn't get a welcome lunch. You didn't get an investiture ceremony. You didn't get any pomp and circumstance, but you've been on the ground working now for a year and a half. And first, we'd like to welcome you on behalf of our entire team. We had a delightful discussion on Wednesday evening. I'm sure we'll have that again today. But why don't we start with just tell us a little bit about who Margaret is and your background, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Absolutely. It's really great to be here once again. And I hope if any of you joined for yesterday, you enjoyed my presentation at the Outlook as well. So as David said, my name is Margaret Chitlowski. I'm an agricultural economist with a specific focus or subfield in labor economics. And so obviously that's a very hot topic these days. Everybody's sort of wondering about the direction of the labor market. And I'm really happy to be here at Ohio State to be able to answer those questions. A little bit more about my background. I am actually from Chicago. I did not grow up on a farm. From the city itself too, not even a suburb. So I'm sure I get a lot of questions about that. And I think David might have more on that in a little bit.
You know I do, right.
But I am a proud alumnus of the University of Illinois, where I did my undergrad and master's, both in agricultural economics. And then I moved to Cornell to do my PhD. So got a little bit more experience in a sort of different agricultural setting, different cultural setting. Really enjoyed my time there, but it's great to be back in the Midwest and here in Ohio.
Yeah, and we're intrigued by your background, the fact that you grow up in the middle of Chicago, but yet you have this interest in food and food policy and food security. And the University of Illinois, of course, has an amazing the old timers, we refer to it as agriculture economics, regardless of the title that each of our universities may use. But you had an interest in that. But also it's weird because you have 2 bachelor's degrees. One of them is actually in history as well. So what's the old saying? If you don't remember the past, you're doomed to repeat it. So
exactly.
What a beautiful marriage to have in the economics world on the side of agriculture, but also have a little history background as well.
Yes, I always loved history, and a lot of our farm policy, if you don't understand the history of it, it doesn't quite make as much sense. And so knowing sort of where we've come from in terms of in that sense is one thing that I think a specialty that I bring that not many people know about. But history was always my first love, but my parents are very pragmatic people, and so I couldn't just do history because they said, "What job will you get with that?"
With that, so they want to make sure you had the backup, which we're pleased that you're with Ohio State, and you were at Cornell, of course. So, and we will always say, what we want is passion for agriculture, right? That's what our producers want. And Diane Shoemaker, who is on here today, is case in point, grew up in Franklin County, didn't grow up on a dairy farm, but yet she's one of the leading dairy economists that great career with Ohio State, right? So we just want the passion. Would you bring a passion? And that passion yesterday, you got to talk about that passion area about now hiring an Ohio food and agriculture labor update. Give us, what did you talk about yesterday, Margaret? And kind of some of the reflections on maybe some of the questions that you might have gotten out of yesterday and the discussion that was spurred as a result of your presentation yesterday at the virtual Ag Policy and Outlook conference, which is still going on. Well, actually, they're in the middle of a break. coming back at 11 o'clock. So as we finish this webinar, folks can jump over that and get a couple more presentations today as well. So talk about your presentation from yesterday a little bit.
Absolutely. So my presentation, which was slightly too long, which I apologize. Like you said, a passion for what I do often leads to a lot of slides and a lot of talking. But what I presented was I wanted to give an outlook on where I see the trends in terms of farm labor supply going for the next couple of years. And I wanted to give a look at the entire sort of food and ag sector as well. So I looked at both on-farm labor trends as well as food processing and food service trends. Also wanted to give a little bit of insight into movements in the unemployment rates, as well as it always comes down to the dollars and cents, the wages in each of these subsectors as well. And so looking at the data and looking at sort of where we are in terms of the historic trend and the most recent trend, obviously COVID was a huge disruption, and producers up and down the supply chain are experiencing, severe labor shortages, and to the extent possible, give some insight into why that's occurring and what can be done to overcome it. There's not, obviously, I'm thinking of it right now as the labor market being in some sort of stalemate. So nobody's really moving. Eventually someone's going to have to break on either the labor demand or labor supply side. But for right now, it seems like we're going to be in this sort of tense period of a holding pattern for a little bit longer. So that's a brief overview.
We don't want to hear that there's tense, and we see that in sectors, not even in agriculture's labor issue
exactly.
is showing up front and center. I know you've been even featured on some TV segments locally here in the state of Ohio about the labor shortages. So I've caught some of those as well. Now, you've been here since August 2020, so we are, you're still in that Eastern Corn Belt, we would say. What's your impression so far about Ohio agriculture and the things that you've learned over the last year and a half that really has made an impression on you about our producers here in the state of Ohio?
Definitely. So one thing that I especially found while I was at Cornell, everyone sort of thought of the Midwest as very monolithic, like it was all sort of the same. Illinois, Ohio, Iowa, it's all the Midwest, corn and soybeans. But what I've really come to appreciate over just the last couple months that I've been live and in person here at OSU is the massive diversity in terms of producers, the really robust dairy sector, the specialty crops. I even had a great conversation with grapes, Grape Producers Association, and just that sort of diversity that it took me a little bit by surprise, even coming from, knowing what I know. It was really incredible to see sort of the different production styles, the different, production commodities. It's very exciting because there's a lot to do and a lot of different things going on.
Well, we say Ohio is the heart of it all. We love our diversity. We love our producers, and very proud of agriculture being our #1 industry here in the state. Now, Margaret, there will be times as we move forward. I know that you're going to be a great friend of Farm Office Live, because even in your research, and as I look back at some of your research, just some fascinating things that you've looked at, put a different lens on this labor side, especially intriguing for me. And some of your research has been on when we have part-time employment, which here in Eastern Ohio, we have a lot of farmers that have part-time employment, plus they have a day job and then they farm on the side. But just the way that money is handled from that part-time employment is different between females and males. And you've done some real cool stuff with that. Maybe that's something that we can talk about in a future Farm Office Live, because spending patterns are different.
Yep. I found that to be, the off-farm income piece is so important, and I think it's really understudied, and I would love to come back and chat about my findings there, especially when you look at the different, male versus female earning and what happens to that money. It's really interesting.
It's really fascinating. And I know as you move forward, you're setting your plan together going forward with labor and policy in the different ways, and you'll be stretched 1,000 different ways now that people know that you're here. But we just appreciate the fact that you're able to join us in the middle of an Ag Policy and Outlook conference here yesterday and today. So we appreciate you jumping on. getting yourself introduced to our farm audience, our Farm Office Live audience. And we just appreciate you being here, and we look forward to working with you here as we go forward for many years to come.
I agree. Thank you so much, David, and
Margaret,
everyone else
thanks.
on the team.
Thanks for being on. And with that, that's Margaret. Thank you for being here. And we're going to go to another topic besides labor that's hot on the radar list for many of those involved in agriculture. And Barry, that is crop inputs as we look for 2022. So Barry, I'm going to let you share your slides, and we're going to just dive in because I know you need to present and then get over to a tax school. So Barry, welcome again. As always, I don't know. Usually you are the ray of sunshine when it comes to this Farm Office Live, and I don't think I mean, look at your sharp dressed man today. But you don't have really good news to share about 2022, do you? You're a little more Eeyore-ish today, I have a feeling.
I think that's the second time I've heard that this week, and I've never been accused of being the ray of sunshine in this group. I think you said that with tongue firmly in your cheek. Anyway, thanks for the optimism, at least. Yes, we've got some issues, and everyone's been following these. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about our outlook right now for what may happen with our major commodity crops, corn, soybeans, and wheat this next year. And also take a quick look at where we've been in the last couple of years and some of the profitability that has existed in the sector and what it may be doing, what it is doing to land values, and what it will likely do to land values and rents here in the next year or two. Okay, so let's take a look. This is going all the way back to 2005. What we do is we look at our crop enterprise budgets, all of our costs that we compile, and then we look at the year-end marketing year average price, and we put together what was the Ohio corn, or the returns to land for each of the crops. And in this case, we're showing a graphical look at Ohio corn. So you can see that we had a pretty big spike back here in 10, 11, and 12. 11, if you remember, was an exceptionally wet spring throughout most of the Midwest. It led to higher prices. And then following that was a pretty bad drought year in 2012. So that led to some of these real high revenues that we're seeing here. And then kind of in the interim, prices drifted lower, and then input costs, especially fertilizer, it drifted lower as well. So what we've seen then in the interim is some lower margin years. And now we're getting into a period again where we're seeing these higher margins show up. And some of this is due to some other factors, and we'll talk about government payments here in a moment. Okay, and what are we expecting for 2022? Well, it's likely going to be a little bit lower than these last couple of years, primarily driven by higher input costs. And that's what everybody is very keen and aware of at this point. We're trying to put numbers to it. This is a moving target, and it's difficult to really gauge. We've been doing some survey work. We're collecting data from various sectors. Some of this is, just discussions with producers and others in the sector, those that are, for instance, the seed dealers and also the crop chemical company dealers. So what we're looking at right now, plugging in numbers for our budgets for this upcoming year, 2022, seed costs roughly 10% higher. However, this number, if anything, is probably a little bit high. We haven't adjusted this yet, but we still may adjust this a little bit lower, perhaps closer to 5%. This number, however, this crop protection or crop chemical costs relating to crop protection chemicals, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, all of those products that producers use. Right now, we're plugging in a 50% higher cost for those for 2022. A lot of concern about availability, especially for some of our primary products, and the differences amongst all the different products. So we're seeing that show up, and also questions about availability going into the spring. Now, right now, at least most of the dealers that I've talked to and I've heard secondhand information from indicate that that is not necessarily going to be a key concern, but there may be a product or two where the supply chain will limit that supply. course, energy. Everyone is keenly aware of what's going on at the pump, right? So we know what energy costs are doing. It's going to affect us in terms of propane costs, those costs of drying crop, primarily corn, and in some cases wheat. Those costs are going to be higher. Diesel, of course, on-road, off-road diesel that we're going to use a lot of on the farm. Right now, this number continues to move higher, and we're probably going to have to tweak that number a little bit higher. But right now, we're plugging in $3 a gallon for on-farm diesel in our budgets. And I know that may be a little bit low currently, but looking at the Energy Information Administration and their modeling for this next year, that's where we're plugging in. That's why we're plugging in that number currently as it is. The big thing that everybody's talking about and seems to be the hot topic at most every diner and coffee shop in rural Ohio is higher fertilizer prices. Well, that and lack of farm machinery and equipment on our dealer lots. But let's talk a little bit about fertilizer first. You know, this is, well, there's a number of factors at play here that are really driving fertilizer prices higher and will for the foreseeable future. So we'll talk more about that. But you can see the increases year over year for some of these products: nitrogen, phosphorus fertilizers, potash. All of these have increased pretty dramatically, and producers are going to have to deal with this, or they're going to have to, you know, be very smart in their selection and application. And that's one thing that, as we work with our agronomists across the college, we've talked about a lot of things as far as mitigating some of these higher prices. First of all, make sure that you're soil testing, understanding your needs for P and K, and there's other sources, manures, sludges, those things. And also looking at more targeted soil sampling, zone sampling, grid sampling, making sure that we know those areas of the fields that actually need product. Okay, I kind of digress there. We are doing some surveying currently, and we're doing this by crop reporting district. We're surveying retailers, 2 in each, and we're getting some response, not complete responses from all of those. Some are willing to share, some aren't, but you can see here, this is the October results. We're currently collecting November data, and these numbers have continued to move up throughout the late summer and early fall. Well, now we're into mid-fall, basically, almost late fall, but you can see the numbers and the ranges here. High prices for 28, urea, and hydrous ammonia, so our nitrogen complex all moving higher, and our phosphorus fertilizers, and you can see on down 1034O as a starter, and potash, all very high numbers. We'll continue to share this data as we go through the winter. Okay, if we kind of put everything together and we look at all the different variable costs or cash costs, if you will, for our budgets, you can see that from last year to this year, or from 2021, I guess, to projecting 2022, we're seeing pretty dramatic increases, 28 to 34%, depending on the crop. Let's just back up a little bit and go back to fertilizer and look at some of the fundamentals, some of the things that are driving these fertilizer prices, and some of the things that we're going to have to continue to watch. First of all, the one big driver throughout this since last, mid-year into the fall, is prices started to increase in many of these row crops. And these high crop prices drove demand, and they continue to drive demand, not only here in the US, but globally. So we're competing for these products in a scenario, in an environment where we've got high crop prices, and normally the signal is that producers will not typically skimp on fertilizer applications. Okay, supply. We look at this side, and there's a number of factors that are also at play, and we need to continue to watch and be attentive to. First of all, the cost side, high natural gas prices. These high energy costs, natural gas is a key component in manufacturing many of these fertilizer products. And with these higher prices, it cuts the margins for these fertilizer manufacturers. And that's something that we've seen over the last 12 months, is that in some cases, these manufacturers have lengthened the times of shutdowns and cleanups and turnovers, or they've simply curtailed production because of some of these higher energy costs. And that's only restricted the supply more and pushed prices higher. These continue to be at play. However, one thing that we are seeing some signs of with these higher end prices for the fertilizer manufacturers, it should spur, and it has spurred in some cases, some increase or expansion in production. And at some point should alleviate some of the real increases that we're seeing, and at least perhaps see a flattening off of these fertilizer prices. Shipping issues are impacting things globally, including fertilizer and all of our other inputs that we're importing. Hurricane Ida was a major disruption for us, a major import-export point for the US, especially the Midwest. And also disruptions, there were some fertilizer manufacturing plants that were taken offline and had some damage due to Hurricane Ida, and a couple of key nitrogen facilities down in that area that were offline for a time. So these have started to correct themselves, but that was a blip. That was well, more than a blip. It was a significant bump in the road for us and added only more pressure to the fertilizer price complex. China indicated, and they announced that they were going to halt phosphate exports out of their country, primarily to maintain their own stocks for their own producers. Recently, we have U.S. International Trade Commission ruling, and this was a ruling that went against a couple of countries that are major importers into the U.S. in terms of fertilizer. These are phosphate fertilizers. That was the ruling. So now we have these countervailing duties of varying amounts, and I've got the percentages if you're really interested. But we now have these tariffs, if you will, on Russia and Morocco for phosphate fertilizers, mainly due to them dumping product. At least that's what the USITC indicated, and the Department of Commerce then followed up on, that they were dumping product below fair market value. Okay, now we also currently have an ongoing case. The U.S. International Trade Commission is looking at a anti-dumping case against Trinidad and Tobago and Russia for UAN or liquid nitrogen. So this is an ongoing. They did vote to continue the investigation. So it looks likely that this may actually occur as well. In other words, having countervailing duties and or, if you will, tariffs on these products. This is not decided yet. So we're continuing to follow this one, but these two pieces only add more pressure to these two fertilizer components that we're in need of. Now, currently there is a case that's been brought by 5 different ag interests against the USITC and the Department of Commerce to overturn this particular case, this countervailing duty on phosphate fertilizers. We're continuing to follow that as well. Okay, now I've given you the bad news. The good news is crop prices continue to be relatively strong. So that's going to, I think, give us some reason for hope going into 2022 as we look at margins. And so we look at the corn budget for this next year into 2022. We're plugging in right now around $5.30 a bushel cash for next fall delivery. Now, if you look at the December futures for next year, they're roughly $5.50. So we're going to take a little bit of a negative basis. So $5.30 is about where we can start to contract next fall delivery for trend yield, all the cost structure that I've discussed, all the increases. Looking at returns above total cost, not great, but returns above variable cost, $3.80 per acre. So in other words, this is what we have left over to pay our overhead, land, machinery, and equipment, pay ourselves a little bit, of course. Not a terrible number in spite of some of these increases. Now, one thing I caution, one thing we haven't addressed yet is putting in higher costs for machinery or land rent. So we're expecting these to move higher. We're just, we're not to the point where we've put every piece together in terms of our outlook for this next year's margin. So more than anything, I guess this number may be a little bit stronger than what it might normally be if we've gotten these changes incorporated, but that's where we're at right now, at least. Soybeans looks better, plugging in about $12.20 a bushel, and we're looking at 386 returns above variable cost, better than corn, but close. And wheat holding up pretty well. Of course, if you look at the September wheat futures for soft red winter out of Chicago, I think they're trading closer to 830 as I looked at those yesterday. So if you take a 30-cent basis on that, you can probably start to lock in some $8 wheat for this next summer delivery. Right now, we've got a little more conservative number in there, 780. So wheat is holding up very well, especially if you start to plug in some additional return for double crops and straw. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. So I gave you the bad news first and then ended hopefully with a little bit better, brighter outlook. We are dealing with a number of issues, including much higher costs, but prices continue to be pretty strong. So the margin outlook is maybe not as bad as what we might expect. Okay, so I will end there, I think. Oh, this is just the comparison of the three. If you want to look at those side by side, what I just shared in the three previous budgets. Okay, I think I've taken up more than my time, probably. So I think it's time to turn it over to Peggy. And she's going to give you the federal, oh, she's got the exciting news for the day. So it's all yours.
Thanks, Barry, for that. And yes, David already shared the, I guess, depending where you're coming from, the exciting news. Some may not find it so exciting, but about a half an hour ago,
news, maybe.
Yes, interesting news. About a half an hour ago, the House did pass the Build Back Better bill, which totally messes up my next slide, which is the slide that I updated us on Wednesday night for Farm Office Live is now outdated. This is the slide that some of you have seen before in our previous Farm Office Live presentations, where I tried to visualize what exactly is going on down in Congress with these major pieces of legislation that seem to be distracting them from getting some of the other pieces of legislation addressed. So this is the update to that slide, and it's intentionally messy because I went in and just made revisions from last month to this month, and you can see that there has been some movement, some changes with that federal legislation. Certainly with the passage of the infrastructure bill November 5th and the president signing that on Monday. So we have a few things to say on that. And then today, just as I said, about a half an hour ago, the House passing by about a 6-vote margin. I think it'll come out at 6. There was still one vote hanging out there. Only one Democrat who voted against that Build Back Better bill. That was the gentleman from Maine who didn't like some of the state and local tax provisions in there. And so that did pass the House. And that's the reference that I had there. It was expected by Thanksgiving. So they're a little ahead of schedule. They surprised us a bit. There was a marathon session last night, by the way. We all like when records are broken. And Kevin McCarthy did break a record last night for the longest speech. I think he went on for 8.5 hours until 5 a.m. this morning to put off that vote. But they turned around and came back at 8 a.m. and the vote was taken. And here we have the passage now in the House. So the update I would make to the chart now is to remove that expected by Thanksgiving. We go to the Senate and they are saying that by Christmas, they will deal with that bill. So we're now pushing off into December what might happen. And David will be glad to know that this one's a little bit shorter than the infrastructure bill, 2,500 pages in this one, David, with about 50 pages of ag provisions. But the tricky part will be what I hope will be Barry's keen oversight in finding all the tax provisions in there and making sure we cover those. So we'll be working on that as that one proceeds to move. As far as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this is a nice visualization of where the dollars went on that. It did pass, is signed, effective now, came out around 1.2 trillion, and half of that in new spending, half of it as we would have expected in continued funding for roads and highways, but $550 billion of new spending for that one. And you see here where those dollars went, most of them, of course, going to roads and bridges, but quite a few other areas that will be affected by that Infrastructure Act. And of course, several provisions that will impact us in agriculture. So there's that visualization for you. If we dig down a little further and ask what exactly does it mean for Ohio generally, not just us in ag, but Ohio generally, numbers have been put together showing what Ohio will receive from that act. And most of it, as you would expect, will be going to highways, but a lot of other areas that will be receiving a good amount of dollars here in Ohio for including bridge replacements and repairs, public transportation improvements, or even new projects for public transportation. There's a good bit going to energy efficiency. Our share of that is yet undetermined, but we'll be receiving money for that. That one surprised me. I had not heard about that until I dug into the bill. Also, electric vehicle charging networks, a lot of wildfire protection, wildfire protection, even for us in Ohio. And we knew those dollars were going to be targeted out west, but $27 million coming our way in Ohio for wildfire protection. And a lot of emphasis in this bill, along with the broadband expansion, a lot of emphasis with cyber security. And so we'll be receiving $25 million for that kind of work to ensure protection. And a lot of that is targeted to the new broadband expansions that will be going into rural areas to also ensure, as they expand those services, that they are adequately protected from cyber attacks. So a lot happening there with the bill for Ohio specifically. Now, if we look at agriculture, and not just Ohio agriculture, but agriculture generally, there are a number of programs, and I don't have numbers on all of these yet, but just to give you an idea of some of those dollars, where they will be sent once we know, excuse me, exactly how much they will be. A lot of pollinator habitat and invasive species dollars going in, especially in and around highways and roadways and ditches. So a lot of money for that. Lake Erie, the Great Lakes, will receive a good chunk of money for further protection efforts. Those regional water designations have been made. There's money going into Pfas detection, and some of you have heard us talk on Pfas before. Those are those forever chemicals that have created some issues, especially for our dairy operations, tapping into some of those chemicals. So there's dollars going into that. Watershed programs, additional funding for those existing watershed programs that USDA operates. And then a strong focus on truck transportation to address some of the supply chain issues that we've seen. You may have heard about the livestock haulers exemption that is now in place that will exempt those haulers from those trucking hours of service limitations and allow them to disregard those if they're within 150 miles of their destination. There's an apprenticeship pilot program that would lower that semi-truck CDL licensure age down to 18 years. And we already have someone on the western side of the state, one of our, Sam probably knows, I saw Sam is on here, one of our vocational programs doing CDL training for high school students. So this would allow them at 18 to proceed with that under that pilot program for driving on the federal highways. And then I like to kind of jab at the men here. There's indication that we need to target women and bring them into the trucking workforce, because statistics show that women are safer drivers than men. So there's a targeted effort here to have a promoting women in the trucking workforce program that will try to utilize women to help provide more of those trucks on the roads. And Barry was, I think, a little bit surprised or upset, or I don't know what your reaction was, Barry, to see that this legislation did include an end to the employee retention credit that was supposed to, we thought, stay in place until the end of the year, but it is now ending early, has ended as of September 30th of 2021. One of the few tax provisions in this bill. So that gives you an idea of what's going on with that one for agriculture. And again, as we look at where we'll be looking next, I expect next month we will be talking about these other bills, because we have some pending deadlines coming with the funding running out December 30th, and that temporary federal debt limit increase also running out December 3rd. I think I said 30th, I apologize, December 3rd for both of those. So we'll start seeing next month what happens with those, and we'll be reporting on those for you then. Okay, so as far as Build Back Better, I was trying to keep up with what they were doing this morning in the House with that. And I think it's still very much up in the air because of the Senate's discussion yet to come, which of these many provisions in this bill will remain. But we did at least get a CBO estimate of the ag provisions that are in the House Ag Committee's portion of that bill. And you can see where some of those dollars come out for agriculture, $26 billion for forestry, another almost $26 billion for rural development and ag credit, and a much smaller amount for research and urban agriculture, and then a lot of dollars going into conservation programs. So around $82 billion for agriculture currently, we think, in the version that just passed the House. And so we'll be tracking that and seeing what the Senate decides to do with some of those. I don't think many of the ag programs are at risk on the Senate side. I think instead you've probably heard that some of the other social programs like the family leave that are really creating a lot of consternation over on the Senate side, but we'll keep an eye on all of that for you. As far as some other federal legislation that is going through, I reported Wednesday night on Farm Office Live that this bill was going to be presented, and it in fact was presented just this week. It was introduced by the bipartisan group of senators. And the intent here is that this bill, the Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act, will replace the next bill that I'm going to talk about that was introduced previously. So this one is bringing that bill into a broader effort to address transparency and discovery in the cattle pricing market. And it is, as I said, a bipartisan effort, a lot of interest in it, a lot of momentum behind this one. And you can see some of the provisions where it will establish mandatory levels of negotiated cash and grid trade for cattle markets. And that will be through a public rulemaking type process. They'll be seeking public comment on those levels. And it will also have some requirements for cash market purchases by packers on a plant-by-plant basis, and some fluctuation in regional minimums for USDA to exercise, again, with public notice and comment. There will be mandates that those regional mandatory minimums would not be less than a certain amount, and those provisions are spelled out in the legislation, along with some prohibitions against any region's mandatory minimum from being 3 times the amount of that lowest mandatory minimum. So it's a different approach than we see. Let me just move over here to this. And we may still see this library coming into place, but this was the Cattle Contract Library Act that was that already passed through the Ag Committee on the House side in October, has a lot of bipartisan co-sponsorship behind it. And so the question will be, how are we going to work this with the act that was just presented? This one would, again, create a mandatory reporting program for packers and make all of that information available in this cattle contract library that would be maintained by USDA. So we'll keep an eye on those. As far as some other bills that have been reported. These were reported out a few weeks ago by the House Ag Committee. So they are getting to work on legislation, whereas the Senate Ag Committee is still in that phase where they're doing a lot of hearings, receiving a lot of testimony, gathering a lot of information before deciding which proposals they'll be focusing on for the remainder of the session. So we had the scholarship funding bill reported out of the House Ag Committee that provides $100 million to universities like Central State, which is an 1890 land grant institution. We have a lot of money going into chronic wasting disease research and detection and management and public education. You can see there $70 million for that. The National Forest Restoration and Remediation Act would allow the Forest Service to capture some interest on their settlement funds and use that for restoration of damaged forest lands, really targeted towards some of the wildfire destruction suffered on many of our national forest lands. And then there's this odd little Pyrolysis Innovation Grants Act. Some of you may be familiar with pyrolysis. I'm not even sure I'm saying that correctly, but it has to do with burning nutshells and converting those shells into various types of products, including fuels and nutrients and other types of commodity products. So $5 million will be going toward that. I don't see a lot of that coming our way here in Ohio, but those who do grow nuts and have nut trees are quite excited by that one. And then finally, this is not an ag bill specifically, but I did want to point out to you that there is an Ocean Shipping Reform Act that was presented back in August, but is now gaining a lot of attention, another bipartisan effort. I know we don't think that happens, but I think I've just shared quite a few of those with you here this morning. And this one would address some of those international shipping holdups that we're seeing that are affecting supply chain. And I'm not going to go through all of those provisions. And honestly, I don't understand some of the provisions, but I wanted to point that out, that it's there and it is gaining attention and it could help with some of those supply chain issues we're seeing related to shipping. And with that, David, I think that's my last slide for federal legislation, correct? Oh, there's a slide that gives you a little bit of a sense of what this Reform Act will do in regards to ocean shipping, excuse me. Okay, so we are going next to you, I believe, David, yes?
Yep, and can you see the slide that says Ohio Ag Blog?
Yes.
And so as Peggy goes through her updates, just a reminder that Peggy and her team, Jeff, they do a wonderful job about putting stuff on the Ohio Ag Blog. So a lot of these bills that she's discussing, there's more in-depth information there at Ohio Ag Blog, her Ohio Ag Blog at farmoffice.osu.edu/blog. Well, just kind of want to stay on the federal side just for a few more minutes. Diane and I will be bringing here some federal farm program and assistant program updates, and then come back to the Ohio side. One of those things, and I asked Peggy this the other day on Wednesday, where does this stand? But if you remember, as we move through some of the pandemic relief, the American Rescue Plan had indicated about waiving the loans for certain FSA direct and guaranteed loans for the socially disadvantaged populations, producers. So that would include African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Hispanic, Latino, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, that those loans would be basically just absolved and taken care of. But Peggy, this has gone to injunction in the federal district court, so it's halted those payments. Anything that you're hearing there, we'll just toss it back to you for just a quick second on that.
What I'm hearing is that it's still going to take a while to sort this out, and that the administration is already preparing an alternative way around that. And I think some of that is in the Build Back Better. So it may go away and we may restart, but nothing at the moment that's happening other than that.
Thanks, Peggy. And those debt payments were 120 to pay up to 120%. So that would basically pay off the loan as well as any associated taxes with those. That was supposed to be back to January 1st of this year. Of course, just what the FSA is saying on their website is no adverse effects for borrowers not making payments on these eligible direct or storage facility loans. but they should be making the regular scheduled guaranteed loan payments as agreed on with the lender. So bottom line here is if you are in those classes and have some of these FSA loans, of course, be in contact with your lender to see where that, how that would impact you right now. Another program that we want to talk about, of course, CFAP has been put to bed, but there are still a couple other programs that are out there floating around that producers might want to be aware of. And one of those is the Organic and Transitional Education Certification Program, so OTECP. Again, another acronym to put in our toolbox, but that's part of the Pandemic Assistance for Producers Initiative. There was $20 million set aside for this, and this is specifically for organic and those producers that are in the process of transitioning to organic, to provide some assistance for expenses, certain expenses, targeted expenses in the fiscal year of 2020, 2021, and 2022. Again, just as a reminder, those fiscal years. So that would go back to start to October of 2019 to catch that first fiscal year. But want to make sure that folks know that those applications for the first 2 fiscal years has opened up this month on November 8th. So since the last time we were here, this program has opened up. And a reminder that the applications and for this program will be taken just until January 7th. So something that producers, if you're organic producers, need to jump on now. So what is part of this? So for those that are organic right now, it includes 3 different areas, basically. The first is it will pay 25% of any certification expenses. So that could include the application fees, inspection fees, could include state organic program fees, even the postage that you use to mail back your applications. You're going to pay 25% up to $250. And then for educational events, so if organic producers are going to extension events, it could be to the OFA conference, it could be to many, many other conferences, educational events, they're going to pay up to $200, 75% of those registration fees up to a maximum of $200. And then there is a provision in there for 75% of expenses for soil testing. Now, there's a key to that: soil testing for micronutrient deficiency. So not your macro, not your typical soil test, but for specifically if you're looking at micronutrient deficiencies in those organic systems, going to pay up to $100, up to 75%, up to $100. Now that same holds true for those operations that are in the transition phase. So they're in the transition. In other words, they are moving into that transition to be certified organic. And you can see, again, the same 3 tenants are in this program, just that the upper dollar figures that they're going to pay for transition has been increased. So for those eligible expenses for the certification, 75% again, but up to $750. For registration fees for educational events, again, 75%, up to $200. And then 75% of those soil testing to document those micronutrient deficiencies up to $100. So bottom line, if you're an organic producer or one that is transitioning to organic, there is a program now that you need to be aware of that you could benefit your operation, and you need to take action before the probably before the end of the year, because you have till January 7th. And then the next program that's out there is a Pandemic Response and Safety Grant Program. So this application program has been open for over a month. So it started on October 6th. And again, this is a short time window because this program closes next week, November 22nd. Now, this is not administered through our Farm Service Agency, but instead the USDA Agriculture Marketing Service. $650 million has been allocated for this program. So these are basically grants to help those expenses that improve the workplace safety measures. And quite specifically, they're looking at specialty crop producers, our meat industry. We've talked about that for a couple months here on Farm Office Live about the impact of our meat processors. So they are targeted in this. Smaller producers, but in the context when you start to read this is $5 million or less of gross receipts. So a lot of our producers might be eligible for this grant program. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that they are looking at of helping you to help give some grants to help for some of those things that you might have done. So workplace safety. So anything that you did to provide a PPE, Maybe it was thermometers or cleaning supplies or hand washing stations. Maybe you installed new air filtration or new signage in your workplace. That would be eligible. Our team loves this one, market pivoting, implementing and pivoting for marketing. So in other words, did your company have to pivot and go from maybe in-person sales to an online platform? And if you had to make some of those adjustments to go to online sales, that would be eligible. Retrofitting any facilities. So that's any type of consumer or worker protection. So that could be the shields, walk-up windows, fans, tents, you name it. Transportation, maybe if you or your business is transporting employees, maybe you had to make some adjustments with that because of social distancing. So maybe there was increased cost there. Maybe you had to make some alterations to worker housing or to some medical. All those costs are in this program. The minimum grant is $1,500 and the maximum is $20,000. A really, really nice program. So for businesses that were making some of those alterations, would encourage you to check those out. Again, you can see the web link there. If you download the slides, you'll be able to click right on that link and go right there and make the application. But if you're going to make that application, you better get it done before Turkey Day here. And then last is this Farm and Food Workers Relief Program. This has been in the news here the last week, in fact, but it was back in September. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack had announced of this program, $700 million worth of competitive funding. Again, we're looking at ways of helping farm workers and meat packing facilities with these pandemic related health and safety costs. So again, a lot of that would be for PPE, but included on this side would be some expenses that you might have had for dependent care, quarantine expenses, maybe some testing. Now, we've been waiting for the request to come out on which state agencies and nonprofits, they are going to be the ones that distribute this money. They have to show that they can demonstrate that they can and they have the ability to be able to get money out to producers. So that RFA is forthcoming. I've been waiting on that. But one thing you might have heard in the news the last couple of days where they've been talking about a fourth stimulus. Well, when they talk about this fourth stimulus, one of the things they've been talking about is this fourth stimulus at a $600 level for essential workers in the agriculture side, grocery workers in the meat industry. You might have seen that in some of your social media sites over the past week. So that's kind of tucked into this. So we're kind of watching and learning about this program. And as we know more, of course, we're going to bring it to you here on the Farm Office Live. And then the Farm Service Agency, farm storage facility loans. We try to highlight our partners here at the Farm Service Agency about different loan programs. Well, we understand we have a nice healthy crop out there across the state. And we understand that folks are looking about, can they do some things to increase their storage? So this is not only our commodity guys like corn and soybeans. This could be into some of those cold storages for our fruit crops, floriculture, you name it. There's a great storage program that is there under the Farm Service Agency. And we would encourage producers to check into that because those loans can be anywhere between 3 and 12 years, a maximum loan up to $500,000. I know some friends that have gotten some of these loans. Incredible time as far as interest rates. On a 3-year term, 0.6%. If you're looking at a 5-year term, 1%. Even if you're looking to a 7-year loan, 1.375%. So there is some money there for producers that are looking to increase their storage capacity, regardless of the product that they may be producing. There's some money there, and we would encourage you to check into that. And then finally, we've been waiting, another program we've been waiting on, and Diane's been watching, lurking, bugging people, saying, hey, give us some details. So Diane, you want to talk about the dairy program updates on the dairy margin coverage program and also some pandemic money?
Sure can. And I promise to try to stay out of the weeds on this one. Just a quick overview, because we've mentioned both of these before. The first one, the updates to the dairy margin coverage program, were first announced, I believe, in January. It's been a while. And if you think about it, we should be having sign up right now for the 2022 dairy margin coverage program. What's going on there is that they are finalizing some rules for the supplemental dairy margin coverage opportunity. And that's going to be important for farms who, when they establish their production history way back in 2014 or 15, have increased production since then. So if they are milking more cows and did not reach that 5 million pound limit on tier 1 premiums, they're going to want to look at this because it'll allow them to more fully cover the milk they're currently producing now with this risk management program. So as that's finalized, they will be opening up coverage for 2022. There was another change that was initiated at that time since this program first hit with the 2014 Farm Bill. It's been a work in progress, and I'd say is really improving in terms of really offering a good risk management tool for dairy farms. And some of the moving pieces in that puzzle is how they discover prices to set the margin that's announced each month. And it's a challenge because it's a national program and there are certainly regional market influences. But the most current one they're working on is how to establish the alfalfa price. So that adjustment is being made. It will happen automatically, and it's retroactive to 2020 coverage. So once this is fully in place, that adjustment will be made. Farms, I believe, will not have to apply for that. It will just happen if they were covered in those years and an indemnity was triggered. But just a note, as we're thinking ahead, it is a program that dairy farmers really need to consider for those who bought up coverage for 2020, 2021. There has been an indemnity on many levels of coverage every month this year based on low milk prices and high feed prices. So it's certainly something we'd rather not see those indemnities triggered. We'd like to see good margins out there in the marketplace, but it is a relatively easy program to use for risk management. The second piece then is the Pandemic Market Volatility Assistance Program for Darien, and they made that into an acronym too, which I will not even attempt. The unique part of this program is that it's not being offered through Farm Service Agency. The Ag Marketing Service is the piece of USDA that's responsible for this. And one of the most important reasons why is because it's going to be based on what farms were actually paid for milk and how they were paid in July through December of 2020. So they are working with handlers and cooperatives who will be the actual entity that, if there are funds available for farms, they will pass through those handlers and cooperatives. AMS is currently working with handlers and cooperatives across the country. They indicated there's about 200, and they're getting very good response from those. And some of that might be to prodding from their farmer, either suppliers or members. But once they have signed agreements with those, that'll be public information, and we'll know exactly who signed up. When will this happen? They indicated that there could be some payments yet late in 2021, but they're looking at a winter timetable. So probably a lot of that is going to sneak into 2022. One important point is that farmers who are shipping milk to handlers that choose not to participate, they will be developing a route for those to apply for the program. Without getting too deep into those weeds at all, what another important message is that this is not based on the negative producer price differentials that we experienced. It's actually going to be based on the class 1 skim price mover calculation, old versus new, and then 80% of that difference. And then also how much of the milk was pooled on the federal order by each processor. And that's a way of getting to the statement that I don't think this is going to be huge dollars for individual farms. It's not going to be 80% of those negative producer price differentials. So it may be a little bit of assistance for farms, but it's not going to be replacing those negative producer price differentials that we had. So as we learn more about that, David, we'll keep folks up to date here on Farm Office Live.
And it's good to hear that there might be a way if their processor's not part of that
Right.
program, that you'll still be able to get
Right.
that. So that's great. And ladies, I didn't make any comments, Peggy, about the driving history of, you mentioned that before, but I will say that we know Peggy's not taking vacation during Thanksgiving week, because just to read the 2,500 pages that you're talking about with Build Back Better, even if you read a page a minute, Peggy, that's going to take you 42 hours. So I know what you're doing next week, 42 hours to digest that. So that's the federal side. We've gone through the federal, and Peggy, that's federal, but we know there's still a lot of stuff that's happening in Ohio. So that's where we're going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the math. Sometimes we don't really want to know the math behind these things, though, do we? That's a little overwhelming, but the legislative update for Ohio is a little less burdensome. No big bills here, but quite a few bills that are moving in the legislature. A lot of activity down there before the break. A newly introduced bill at the end of October provides some income tax credits for those who give qualifying donations of either real property or personal property or services to a township. And that can be up to $5,000. Now the township has to accept that donation, but this could be an opportunity for so many of our ag landowners, farmers who do assist in township matters. There could be a tax credit for that if this bill goes through. It has been referred over to the Senate Ways and Means Committee and has not yet had a hearing, but that's where it will be, and we'll let you know next month if anything happens with that one. The AgLink deposit program bill that I've reported on previously does continue to move. It's had second hearings on both the House and Senate side before the Financial Institutions Committees, and those were just this week. And that would expand those AgLink deposit program loans to allow co-ops to apply for those loans, and also to remove the $150,000 limit on those loans and replace it to amount as determined by the Department of Treasurer or by the Director of the Treasury according to current market conditions and the loan itself. So those loans could increase is the expectation if this goes through. We also had the statutory lease termination bill, House Bill 397 hearing this week. I attended and testified at that hearing, and I don't know if it was something I said, but we thought they would vote on it and they chose not to. So that one is being held. Hopefully it will be addressed in the next hearing, but it would provide a statutory termination date that would require landowners who want to terminate a lease that doesn't address termination to give that termination, that notice of termination by September 1st of that lease year, and to give it in writing. So it would change some of the protocols, but especially in our verbal leasing situations, we would expect that a written lease would already address termination. So in those situations where we haven't adequately addressed termination, haven't addressed it at all, actually, then a September 1st written notice of termination would be required by the landowner, or that lease would flip over into the next year. So that one is currently on hold before the House Ag Committee and not yet over on the Senate side. We had an auctioneer auctioneers law revision bill go through the House Ag and Conservation Committee this week. And that one changes a lot of the way we function in the auctioneering world. It would eliminate the apprenticeship requirement for auctioneers and replace that with an education requirement. And apparently there's a shortage of auctioneers and some barriers to entry into that field. So this revision is intended to address those shortages. It would also bring online auctions under the purview of the Ohio Department of Agriculture and give them regulatory authority over those auctions, which they currently do not have. So that one, as I said, was reported out of the committee on Wednesday. There's the ephemeral features bill that I've reported before about, and this one is very, very controversial, although it passed the House largely along on party lines on September 29th. It did have a first hearing in October before the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee, but they have not acted on that since then. And actually, there's a lot of pressure being exerted on the Senate to kill the bill from the environmental interest side. So it's a very controversial bill. What it would do is exclude those ephemeral features that arise as a result of precipitation. So any water flowing or pooling that is a result of precipitation only, and we're excluding wetlands here. But if that's what causes that water, then it would be deemed an ephemeral feature and it would be excluded from our water quality standards and water pollution control programs here in Ohio. It's contrary to some actions that are occurring on the federal level in regard to WOTUS, although we just heard yesterday that the EPA has now brought the old WOTUS rule back and is proposing that. So I think it could probably conflict with that should that rule go through. And we don't know what will happen with that here in Ohio because of that pressure being exerted to kill this bill, but a lot of interest from the Republican side of the General Assembly in passing it. The Beginning Farmers Bill, House Bill 95, that I've reported on probably more than any other bill here in Farm Office Live, is back on again. It's been on and off and on and off. Remember, it passed the House back in June. It had its first hearing before the Senate Ways and Means Committee at the end of October. So it seems that that committee is going to pick this up and address it, but I can't be absolutely sure because this one has stopped so many times. It would give beginning farmers the opportunity to be certified as beginning farmers and to receive income tax credits for financial management training. And it would also give income tax credits to those who sell assets to those certified beginning farmers. That could be land and other types of assets. So that one may yet go through. We shall see. The overtime pay bill passed the Senate in the end of September and did have a hearing before the House Commerce and Labor Committee at the end of October, but nothing has happened since then. That would provide some exemptions from overtime pay for those de minimis type things that employees do and for traveling to and from the work site if they weren't approved by their employer. So would reduce some of those overtime pay obligations for employers. I also wanted to point out this joint resolution, which is the mechanism that the General Assembly uses to propose something that would amend the Ohio Constitution. If they pass this joint resolution, then it would be put on the ballot for the voters to decide whether to accept this proposal. And this one would amend the Constitution to establish a constitutional right to hunt and fish in Ohio. And I've given you the language there that would say we have a right to hunt and fish using traditional methods, and only a few types of regulations and laws can interfere with that, or we would be subject to only a few of those. And you see those here, laws that would promote conservation and preserve the future of hunting. So that proposal is before the Senate Ag and Natural Resources Committee. It received a hearing, its second hearing this week. And again, if it would pass through both the Senate and the House, it still would have to be put on the ballot next November for the voters to decide whether to adopt that constitutional amendment. Also, this proposal passed the Senate earlier this week, and it would allow post-nuptial agreements, Senate Bill 47. Ohio is one of only 4 states that do not allow post-nuptial agreements or allow those who had a prenuptial agreement to amend or revise that agreement after marriage. And this bill would change that. So it would alter those legal relations that a husband and wife, a spousal situation can have, and would allow them to make changes after marriage in regards to property distribution, inheritance, those kinds of issues that are now according to Ohio law rather than according to the agreement of those parties. There is also a bill that went through that some of you may have heard about, the Business Fairness Act. It did pass the the Senate earlier this week, so it will now go to the governor. And this is one of those COVID bills that would allow businesses that would be ordered to cease operations or limit operations because of a pandemic like COVID or an epidemic or a bioterrorism event to remain open if they were ordered to close. And this would not be if they were individually as a business ordered to close because of something unique that they're doing. But generally, those businesses ordered to close because of a pandemic could remain open if they follow the same safety standards that the essential businesses that are allowed to remain open would follow. And that did pass the Senate, so we'll go on to Governor DeWine. He vetoed a similar bill last time, but he has indicated that he is okay with this one. So that will probably become effective here shortly. And with that, I am turning it back over to you, Diane.
Okay. So with a little bit of our remaining time, just wanted to share with you some additional numbers from our Ohio Farm Business Analysis program. And we're back to looking at farms who have a primary emphasis or a major emphasis on crop production. So corn, soybeans, wheat, et cetera. So we have 24 farms in 2020 that met that designation. That does include 2 dairy farms, but they also had a major enterprise in crop production and are selling grain by the semi-loads. So of those, well, little touchy there today. So first sharing with you, we're going to look at some liquidity and solvency measures today. And so the middle column, we have the average of those 24 farms. And then over here on the right, we'll look at the benchmarks. And then the second piece we'll look at is dividing these, looking at these same factors, but looking at them by farm size. So as we just take that overall look of these farms today and start with current ratio, a very good indicator of how much cash is in the business, how easy is it to pay bills, meet financial obligations, take advantage of opportunities as they come up. And the really good news is it was excellent this year, 3.52. So I like to think of that as $3.52 of current assets for every dollar of current liabilities. And our benchmark in the agriculture community is we'd like to see that greater than 2. And, you know, if we compare that back to our performance for these farms in 2019, we had 30 farms with this focus. Some of them are the same, but recognizing that it isn't all the same farms. But in 2019, that current ratio was only 1.91. And part of this strength can be attributed to the fact that in 2019, a number of these crop farms did not have the kind of normal average production that they do on corn and beans. So there weren't necessarily the bushels of corn and beans on inventory. Some who usually had crops in inventory had sold them already last year. So higher inventories, of course, coupled with the fact that there were some higher prices on those, as this is a market valuation on those current assets. So overall, great news to see that we have a current ratio at 3.52, and actually only 9 were less than 2 and 5 were in double digits. So some good current situation there. Then another way of looking at those current assets and liabilities is by measuring working capital, the difference between those. And that was up substantially, over $160,000 from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So that's comparing the beginning and ending balance sheets of these same farms in 2020. So a lot more strength there. Our benchmark is positive, definitely want to be that, but enough. And so for the is it enough piece, we go to our third measure of comparing working capital to the gross income generated by the business. And so for our 24 farms, they were at 52.6% in 2020, which is about as strong as I've ever seen it. We have that benchmark. It's kind of taken a while to get that benchmark for the industry, and we're looking at greater than 30%. And it also, if working capital improved, it's more than likely that this benchmark improved also. And more than half, 15 of these farms were meeting that benchmark of being greater than 30%. So the final thing we want to look at for all the farms is the debt to asset ratio. Solvency of the farm business, we are looking at just the farm assets and liabilities and on a market valuation for those assets. So it was 21% average for all farms, and we'd like to see that at less than 30%. So certainly strong in that measure as well. So now as we take those numbers we just looked at, the average here, now we're looking at these same factors, but by farm size. And so we had 5 farms with 100 to 500 acres, and their average size was 281 acres. These 8 farms with 500 to 1,000 acres averaged 695 acres. There were 5 farms in this 1,000 to 1,500 acre category, almost 1,300 acres there. And our final category today is 1,500 to 2,000. That sounds like a game show. Our final category today is 1,500 to 2,000 acres, and they averaged 1,626. And we did have, if you add these up, we're short one farm. There was a larger farm that was above those 2,000 acres. And there was enough difference there in these that I thought would be more valued to keep that farm out of this higher acreage group, so we can see just the numbers for that large group. So as we look across current ratio, overall, we had an extremely strong current ratio. You can see there was strength in both of these 2 smaller categories. And while these are below the average in this 1,000 to 2,000 acre farm categories, still solidly above that benchmark of 2. Working capital increased from beginning to end of year for all of these categories. This 1,000 to 500 acre category increased over 34,000 from beginning to end of year. The 500 to 1,000 acre category increased over $54,000. The working capital here for that 1,000 to 1,500 acre category increased over 200,000. And finally, this largest category, 1,500 to 2,000 acres, their working capital increased over $300,000 on average from the beginning to the end of the year. So again, we had very strong working capital to gross revenues as a group, and each one was well above that 30% benchmark. So, that is definitely reflective of that strong current position that overall these farms experienced. There was, if we step back to working capital for a second, there was at the beginning of the year, 4 of these farms had negative working capital. By the end of the year, only 1 was in a position where there was negative working capital. And finally, we look at this debt to asset ratio. You can see our average 21%, our benchmark was less than 30. So real strength in the solvency position here for their first 3 groups of farms. And even though it is above that 30% at 32%, our 1,500 to 2,000 acre farms also did a good showing in that solvency measure. So even though we aren't to the end of the year, we certainly are at a time when farms should be thinking about how am I going to keep track of, and answer the questions, how did I do on the whole farm basis and my enterprises? And, you know, for a lot of farms, it's going to be a good looking year, but that's just as important a year to be doing analysis, especially when we listen to the things Barry was saying about increases in those inputs. So knowing where a farm is at really gives them a leg up as they make decisions about where to invest those input dollars. So David, I will hand that back to you.
Great. Thanks, Diane. It's hard not to say cow when you're a cow person, right?
I think I only did it once.
Yeah, so we know exactly what you're saying. Just wanted to end today. If you have some questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the Q&A, but we wanted to share some upcoming events with you. Of course, Barry has slipped off here because they are in the middle of a virtual tax school today. So this afternoon, they're gearing off for the last section of a virtual tax school. Few more of those are still around the state. So if you're a tax professional, we encourage you to do that. And as well as there's an intensive tax update on Monday, December 13th, all day long. Greg Bouchard from up there in Cornell is going to be the featured speaker. That's going to be a great program. So if you're a tax professional, I encourage you to get onto that webinar. And for those that maybe we're farmers, we have a farmer and farmland owner income tax webinar hitting the highlights of some of the changes that have happened over the last couple of years that we need to be aware of when it comes to the depreciation, and maybe it's a non-employee compensation and all the different payroll issues that we have. That's going to be on December 9th, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. I'll be glad to be working with Michael Langemeyer from Purdue, as well as Barry from our shop here to teach that on December 9th. And if you go to go.osu.edu/tax schools, you can find out more details about those. And you can get a quick lunch here and come back at 1 o'clock, the final session, which is a good one, of the virtual agriculture policy and outlook meeting is going to be at 1. Jonathan Koppes from University of Illinois is going to be talking a conversation on the next farm bill. So if you still have time to get on to the last session for that, as well as for the farm succession side, Peggy gives a great update on this post-nuptial agreement. Here, that is legislation that's moving here in Ohio. We're going to be talking all things estate planning and farm succession planning. 3 regional workshops, 1 in Greene County, 1 in Wood County, 1 in Wayne County as we move into 2022. If you're not from those counties, you're welcome to drive there to attend those. Next year, we'll be putting them in some other locations, but you can also jump on the virtual one, which is in the evening on January 31st, February 7th, 21st, and 28th. More information can be found at go.osu.edu/farm succession. And we'll be having registration details for each of those locations posted on that website shortly. And with that, I don't know, Peggy or Diana, if you have any closing comments. I don't see, I believe, any questions in the Q&A that are sitting out there unresolved. So we'd just like to thank everybody who was on today. We, on behalf of the team, like to wish you a happy Thanksgiving next week as well. So Diane, Peggy, any closing comments?
David, I just wanted to note, I wasn't able to attend any of the Ag Outlook conference, but I note that they are recording and posting that on their website. So those of you who haven't made that or can't make the last presentation today, you will be able to go back and view those on that website for those. And happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
All right, and as always, you can always check these Farm Office Live webinars too on Farm Office Live, go.osu.edu, farmoffice.osu.edu. Did I get that right? Farmoffice.osu.edu. Just go to that and you can get the recordings from this as well. So with that, we appreciate everyone being on. And until we meet again,